Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to another video. Alhamdulillah, in this video we will learn how to prepare the ink for Arabic calligraphy. For that you need a pipette, ink, a container and lacquer. Now I am using a regular pipette that I got from the medical store. I would be using Senelayer ink, the purple shade. I would be using a small plastic container, which I think you can easily find at a general store or any sort of medical shop. And I'm using pure mulberry silk lacquer, which I sourced from here in India. This perhaps lacquer is the most important part of the entire preparation process, because the good quality lacquer will make sure that the ink does not dry out soon, okay? But eventually, because we are using waterproof inks, they will dry in any container that you put unless you regularly use it, okay? What lacquer does is it lengthens that process. There are certain alternatives to lacquer. You can use sponge, you can use stitching threads, thin stitching threads, cotton threads that is. But the problem with both is they would dry out very soon. So it's actually a smart investment to buy good quality lacquer, because it may cost you more than regular thread, but it will save you a lot more on the ink. And we know inks are far more expensive if you want to buy good quality. Okay. All right. So let's begin the preparation process. The first thing you will do is you will detangle the lacquer. Okay, this comes in this entangled form if it is bought in the purest form. If you buy it in a process form, then there are many different ways you will get lacquer. You will detangle it. To save time, I have already done that. So this is how it looks after you sort of detangle, and every individual strand can be separated from the other. That's the hallmark of pure silk. Okay, so you can see the strands are separated from the other. So what I would do now is I will put the lacquer inside the container. So I will just make a small ball so it fits perfectly well. All right, so it goes inside. How much lacquer should you add? That's a very subjective question. I think this particular container is of 20 ml approximately, if I'm not wrong. You should always keep a ratio of 1/3 to 2/3. After you pour the ink, the lacquer should occupy at least 1/3 of the container. Okay, so now I will start with pouring ink. There are several ways you can do that. Sometimes it is wise to add a few drops of water to make sure the lacquer is imbibed well. So I'll add a few drops of water, maybe 4 to 5 drops, not more than that. Otherwise the ink would get diluted. And you will make sure that every strand of lacquer is inside the container when you start pouring the ink. Otherwise it would give you a tough time while writing. Okay, it looks fair enough. See how it sort of glues to your finger. So I'll add slightly more water, maybe 2-3 drops. That's it, not more than that, please. And I think it should be ready. Okay, so now I will take the ink. It has its own dropper. So I'll add the ink to the container. I think overall I would be adding 2 to 3 ml of ink. And now I will use the qalam and make sure the entire lacquer, the ink spreads throughout evenly. one of the things that you will make sure is that liquor occupies the entire base. You should not keep liquor one-sided, or rather should I say on one side of the container. I'll explain you what I mean. More ink, and it looks fine to me. Keep going, keep doing this process until every strand of liquor is imbibed with ink. You might spend a few more minutes doing this initially, but trust me, this would be far easy for you to write later. Okay, so this seems like it has been prepared. Now observe carefully. Entire base is occupied by liquor. It's not thrown at one side. It's very important. You see, this is how it looks. Now, how much ink should we add to the container? That's a very, very subjective answer. You might find people telling you add 20 ml, add 10 ml, add 5 ml, or add 2 ml, etc., etc. But that is completely subjective. It depends on the container that you use. So how do we judge whether the ink is enough or not? There are two ways to figure that out. These are indicatives. You might have your own experience, but this one works fine with me. Once you dip the qalam, you should see ink surfacing. You see the ink surfacing? I hope you can. There you go. The ink is beneath the liquor, but when I dip the qalam, ink surfaces. There you go. Okay, that's one indication. Another indication is when you invert the container, the ink will not fall. Okay, so when you dip the qalam, if the ink surfaces, then you know that you do not have less ink. I mean, the ink is adequate. That's one way to identify whether you have less ink or more ink. Less ink or not. Then the other indicator which I suggested, that is you invert the container and no ink will fall or pour out. That's an indication that there is no excess in the container. Okay, very, very important. So this is something that I had to learn the hard way. I wanted to make sure that you don't have to go through that. Okay, so the third indication, of course, which is the foolproof, is to try it out. Let's try. Okay, it looks okay. Let me try a new paper. Of course, I will make a video on what papers I use. This is parchment paper or food wrapping paper. In India, it's called butter paper. Let's try and write. All right, the ink seems consistent enough. Yeah, it looks good. Try and make smooth, consistent strokes. That's good. Now, what should be the water to ink ratio? And again, you would see here a lot of calligraphers saying keep 1:2 or 2:3 or 4:5. That again depends on the ink. For example, this is a Sennelier shellac based ink, which is relatively thin. It's not too thick, so I don't need to add a lot of water to it, because if you do add, like even in the ratio 1:2, where 2 drops are ink, 1 drop is water, this would dilute considerably. So do not use that formula. Whereas if I use, let's say for example, Sumi ink, okay, you might need to add a few more drops of water, when you write with Sumi ink. Again, that is completely subjective. Sometimes I do not add any water because I want that thick raw color. Okay, then if you use another Sennelier ink, which I've used in this art form, Sennelier also has a black ink. Here in this art form, you see how dark this is. Okay, now this has almost no water in it. It is just ink. Okay, because the flow of the ink is very well. There are several reasons why you add water. One of them is because we use calligraphy ink, they are thick, and it takes sort of working towards it on the column for the ink to flow. That is why we recommend you add water to the ink. Okay, but there are certain inks which are fluid by themselves, so for that you do not need to add any water. Okay, this one is the black ink by Sennelier, and as you see, it's dark, thick, and quite fluid. Therefore, I don't add water to this ink generally. As you observe here as well, I added just a few drops only to make the lacquer wet. That's it. Other than that, there was no addition of ink or water to this ink. Okay, so this was the simple process and a few cues to know how to prepare ink, how to know that the ink is ready for Arabic calligraphy, and how it sort of helps you in using color. Now, one question that you ask, why do we need lacquer? Why don't we directly dip the column in the lacquer and write? Let's answer that. Here is the ink, and I directly dip the column in the ink, and I make an attempt to write. You see that blot? That is the problem. Okay, every time you dip the column in the ink, you will see a lot of excess and a blot, so that's not conducive. Now let's try the same process with the solution that we've prepared. There is no blot. There is no blot. There you go, and you get smooth strokes every time you write. Whereas if you do this, ink here is going to be a lot more than what it is here. Okay, so that's important. That is why I say the role of lacquer is important when you prepare the ink. However, there are alternatives. You can use cotton threads and even sponge for that. Alright, that's all I have for this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and do not forget to enroll in the advanced course. We are doing a lot there. As you know, in the previous video, I taught you the shape of Jim. We learned the initial, middle, and the end forms of Jim in the advanced course. So see you there, hopefully. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.